You're not dreaming. You're watching The Ghouligans, Episode 4. I'm your humble horror host, Mr. Lobo. I just had some coffee, and we're ready to roll back into our Ghouligans Marathon. I'm, again, very honored to be doing this audio commentary. I had no idea that I'd be talking for 3 hours, but, we're here together, and we're going to make the best of it. Of course, this shot, the classic group shot, is always different at the end of the open. Still don't know whether Slack Pack is a reference to Church of the Subgenius or not. Definitely a reference to that could be a reference to the Drac Pack, but probably a reference to the Rat Pack, which was Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and those guys from the martini swilling crooners from the 60s. The name of this episode is Chicks Dig Vampires. And this, I think, is in response to the modern trend of horror films being made safe for 16-year-old girls and their mothers. I think it started with the series of books of Twilight, or actually probably Harry Potter, the series of Harry Potter books, and then went into the series that they sort of graduated into the Twilight books, which has given the world a lot of 46-year-old novice readers who were turned on by teenagers. Anyway, this is a imitation or a parody or a spoof of Edward Cullen, the vampire from the Twilight films, a heartthrob, Go Team Edward, as you might see on a t-shirt in the Hot Topic. Edward Cullen is a heartthrob vampire, a modern heartthrob vampire, and to capitalize on that, Wolfgang is now dressed up like a vampire instead of a werewolf, which they also have werewolves, sexy werewolves, in the later Twilight films, or so I am told. There used to be a vampire in the group of the Ghouligans. In the black and white Ghouligans Super Show from 2008, we had Count Farnham. And Count Farnham is no longer with them. We saw his painting hung up on the wall in the second episode, Mommy's Curse. But now we're being introduced to a brand new vampire. This is Count Fleming. Count Fleming is a wonderful, good, very funny portrayal of, well, I wouldn't say a modern vampire because he's stuck in the 70s. Head writer Michael Kosick calls him a disco sleaze-pyre. He was apparently bitten in the 1970s. This is Jamie Fernandez, by the way, playing Count Fleming. And again, as the story goes, he was bitten during the disco era in the 1970s and, of course, became immortal in that time. So he has got the stylish, he just sort of stuck with that style. He's got the disco chains around his neck and the orange pants and the whole thing. So they're thinking that their lack of success with the ladies is due to the fact that they don't have a vampire in their group anymore. And since the name of the episode is Chicks Dig Vampires, they're going to try to take a page out of Count Fleming's book. Now, I'm not sure about the origin of the name Count Fleming. I don't know if it has to do with the root word phlegm. I know that when I'm wearing vampire teeth, and this is going from my memories as a child, dressing as a vampire for Halloween, you would put those plastic vampire teeth in your mouth, and you start talking like this, because it was basically a saliva machine, or basically collect a lot of spit in your mouth. So perhaps, again, maybe that's why he's called Fleming. He could be producing lots of phlegm. But now, anyway, that being said, and maybe the less said the better, we're moving on to the Ghouligans. The lads are now dressed up as vampires. So you've got their own versions of different styles of vampires. Boris kind of looks like a Hammer horror sort of 60s vampire, and Void is dressed like Lestat from the Interview with a Vampire, which was Tom Cruise, I believe, in the feature film, but based on the Anne Rice novel Interview with a Vampire. We're bumping out, not with a drawing, but with a nice group shot of the boys. And here we are back in the graveyard with Void, and with another sort of skit of him digging, I guess. This is, I think, something that's very brave, something that would not be in a 70s kids show or any kids show. This is recycled from their Ghouligans Christmas special, Sponsor a Monster. I don't think you would do a parody of a starving children charity in a children's show, in a real children's show, and certainly you wouldn't be eating children in a real children's show. I think that this episode, it becomes very clear the intention of the show, which is it's a show for adults with juvenile tastes, and not really a children's show or a modern version of a 70s children's show. I like how he kind of gets lost there, walking through. They always have these guys walking through the woods or whatever, and that's nice. And then this, of course, is Jamie Fernandez as Count Fleming. A lot of charisma, funny guy, naturally funny. So good addition to the group as far as Mr. Lobo's concerned. And I guess another bump. I like these little silent kind of comedy bits that they do. And then there's, of course, a bump card. We talked about bump cards, although those aren't artwork. Those are photographs, and bump cards can be photos. They don't have to be artwork. Now they're in a vampire bar. This is kind of a common trope also, where the vampires have their own restaurant or have their own bar, that there's this whole subculture. There is sort of a vampire subculture, people who call themselves vampires. There are some people who believe there are real vampires, which is subject to interpretation. On Cinema Insomnia, we interviewed a man named Alejandro, who basically was a sculptor and and a dental technician, and made custom vampire teeth for people, for parties. There are, like I said, a lot of people who dress as vampires. I think vampire is like one step beyond goth, so if you're already in that scene, you might as well become a vampire. So there are a lot of people who have custom vampire teeth made, who live a vampire lifestyle. Let's hope they're not really drinking blood, but they who knows? Everyone probably takes it as far as they can let themselves take it, but there is a vampire subculture. In the movie, and I don't think it's 1972 Tales from the Crypt. I think it's the sequel, the Amicus Vault of Horror, which came after Tales from the Crypt, where they had a restaurant or a bar that was all vampires. And I don't know if this is referencing that, but that is a time-honored trope of there being a secret society of vampires where they would have their own clubs and restaurants. This is our sexy lady vampire, Countess Fiona. And they kind of briefly mention that she's already has a husband, which is a plot point.
The Countess. They don't know it yet, but we are going to crash at the castle
There's a
tonight.
Paranormal State poster in the background of this bar or this nightclub. This was actually filmed at Katie's of Smithtown in Long Island,
If you
and
want to be my hemo gobbler, you got to
I don't
get with
know
my
if that
friends.
Paranormal State
That's right.
poster
What's in
would
your face then?
is up
Yeah, are they
all
hot
the
vampire
time,
chicks
but
like you?
Uh-huh.
No way.
it is kind of
My
appropriate.
Monsterettes are dead sexy. They're over there. Over here, girls.
Now these are the Monsterettes: Cherry, the she-wolf, Susie of the Dead, and Electra. Uh, I think Cherry the she-wolf looks a lot like the lady in the radiator in David Lynch's Eraserhead. I don't have any confirmation on that, but you know, that's what she reminds me of. I don't know if that's intentional or not.
Deadward Cullen, and all I need is your love.
There was a special effects artist by the name of Strickfaden who did all of the Monster Lab equipment in the Frankenstein movies and kind of designed these sort of electrodes, the big ball with the discs going around it. And there were these giant towering conductors or whatever they are. I don't know my electrical terms, but she's got them coming out of the sides of her head. So she's got these 30s style electrodes coming out of the sides of her head as a homage to the original Frankenstein films.
So, what you guys die yesterday?
And these guys aren't catching on the fact that, you know, they don't really need to pretend to be vampires for a Frankenstein, a zombie, and a werewolf. But they're those sunglasses there look like the Back to the Future sunglasses from Taco Bell on the zombie there. They were supposed to be, ironically, they're supposed to be the sunglasses from the year 2015. But when you purchased your taco Happy Meal or whatever in the 80s, you would get those sunglasses. So I don't know what the significance there is. That I think they're all kind of 80s styled, which is probably why they're dressed the way they're dressed. I mean, she's kind of got a Cyndi Lauper sort of Madonna 80s look, and so they're all sort of retro styled monster gals, just like the boys are retro styled. This is sort of emulating some dancing sequences in various movies. I would say specifically Teen Wolf, perhaps Once Bitten, maybe Can't Buy Me Love. Kind of reminds me of the Goofy movie, too, with the sort of dance-off happening. You know, but this is real common. Again, 80s movie situation here. Then, of course, you've also got the Saturday Night Fever disco thing happening, too, which is in keeping with their new addition, Count Fleming.
Listen, Count Dweebula, we don't go for cheap, corny-ass posers, and we don't like vampires much. So why don't you and your friends just drop dead again and leave us alone?
Now, I'm not sure if she was one of the island girls, island women from the Ghouligans Island episode, but she kind of reminds me of the lead savage girl from that. And of course, I'm talking about the Frankenstein.
My little sex fire. We will be
I mean, Electra.
doing it in no time, huh?
Again, we're dealing with some more adult humor here. I think these guys are kind of transcending the simple spoof of the kids show. I think that they're kind of coming in on their own. This scene here is kind of morphs into a parody of a scene from Reservoir Dogs, and I'm going to let it unfold here, but it's definitely in the realm of more adult humor for the Ghouligans.
To make out.
Oh God. Oh God, no.
Well, we've been striking out all night. You've been at the bar sucking face. You dragged us to this godforsaken hellhole, and this entire night has sucked neck. And we want to go home. We've had enough.
It's not my fault you guys can score.
What? I can score. You take that back.
Hey, wait a minute. Did he just say that you can't score?
Yeah, man, that's not cool, man.
You're not cool, man. You can't even score dressed as vampires in a
Get ready for it.
bar.
Hey, man, I can score. I'll score plenty. I mean, I'll go out there right now and I'll
This I feel is the turning point of the whole series.
Man, these girls will tear you apart.
Oh, look, guys. Look, I'm really scared. Can we just please go home and forget this whole thing ever happened?
No, we're not going anywhere, Void. We're not going anywhere. How's this for scoring?
What?
Take it easy, big. You don't want things to get as ugly as you.
You think you can show up here, ruin our night, and embarrass us on our own show?
Yeah, we can embarrass ourselves just fine, thanks.
You would not see this in a 70s kids show.
Man, nobody wants this. Come on.
Put the gun down or we do void.
No! Get that gun away from Void! Get that gun away from Void! Get that gun away from Void!
You can't help but laugh. It is so over the top. I like that he ends up having the gun to his own head. Of course, this harkens back to Void shooting himself in that bumper from the earlier episode. Again, not something you would ever see in a 70s kid show. There's so much happening here. They're pretending to be modern, sexy vampires on top of pretending to be 70s kids show monster characters on top of being in Reservoir Dogs.
You just gotta be yourself. That's
On top of being in an after-school special with a lesson about being yourself. Again, so many cultural references, so many layers. It's a blossom. It's an awesome blossom of awesome. It's an onion, a virtual
Let's get out there and be ourselves
spicy onion of
and say goodnight.
goofiness.
Listen, girls, we aren't exactly what we said we are. We're sorry for lying to you.
See, we're not really vampires, but we do kind of have the same diet.
There's the Mike
That's
Nesmith
great.
hat again.
Actually, we're just a bunch of ragtag monsters looking for love and beer.
He's not drinking his trademark Totally Toxic. He's just drinking a beer there.
Maybe have a night charge?
I really do feel like those are the Back to the Future 2 glasses, but I had a pair of those. They probably just found them in a thrift store. Another great piece of artwork by Brian Mays. And there is Count Fleming having a snack. It looks like he's enjoying Blobby's snack. He's eating Blobby's pet food. Hanging a little too long on that, but that's all right. This is another sketch that has been lifted from the Ghouligans Christmas special. As you can see, it includes Count Farnham, original member who is no longer with them.
Collect all 4 of your favorite funny monsters, now available. Count Farnham,
That's embarrassing.
Wolfgang,
Drink up. Totally toxic.
Void,
I can't even kill myself.
and Boris,
Time to recharge.
all here for you to play with. Now free of harmful...
This is, I think, again, another turning point for me where it's clear that they are not for children. They are for adults with juvenile tastes. Here they are eating the brains of the kid's dad. So, you know, even though what they're doing is very appealing for children because of the genre they're spoofing, these guys are doing adult humor, semi-adult humor. I like these little silent skits that they bump in and out with. Again, the green screen stuff is very Croft Super Show. Brian Mays. He worked on a comic book called 13 Hosts that I wrote. So look up Brian Mays. He's done a lot of artwork of horror characters, horror hosts, and all kinds of fun genre characters, creatures.
You know, I could wear this.
Could you?
Yeah.
Void, as sensitive as ever, on a first date, telling his gal that he could wear her clothes.
Yeah.
Cool.
Another again, they've just sort of worked it into the storyline that their makeup is falling apart, which you know, they just have to keep going. You know, those things happen, and we forgive it.
What can I say? I guess I'm just a shy guy with a big brain. What a pretty gal like you want with a...
You know, this is nice. You know, it's kind of neat to see the Ghouligans win once in a while.
Just really happening.
But you kind of know it's not going to last. But enjoy this. You know, the losers are winning. And like I said, it doesn't happen often, so this is nice to see. Not for kids. That reminds me of Pee-wee's Playhouse, the castle model.
I'm in love. Me too. Ain't it great?
Which was a kids show in the 80s. It was kind of for adults too.
Wait, losing your virginity? You're a virgin?
No.
I love that joke where the ladies' man of the group was a virgin all along. It's nice. It's funny. Usually the biggest talker
You're amazing, Fleming baby. So,
is the littlest doer.
me, a bottle of O negative.
Lots of vampire jokes. Again, I think Count Fleming fits in real nice here, but he definitely is establishing or helping establish this new tone of more adult humor for the series. It becomes clear who this show is for. More clear. They're coming into their own. I do feel this episode is a big turning point.
Forever, for real this time.
Forever, Void.
Guys, I'm not a virgin.
Yeah, right.
Of course, we knew this was going to happen. Briefly touched on that they were that the vampire Fiona was already attached.
Were you looking at, Sparkplug?
There's a lot of Frankenstein stuff and rockabilly culture and biker culture. Makes sense. Monster Kid culture kind of crosses into biker culture a lot. And punk culture. A lot of subcultures adopt monster stuff.
Peasants.
Car culture.
Honey,
And of course, this is a classic vampire.
And
Where do you think you're going, Count Fleming? Gotta go, Ghouligans.
I like this these bat transformation where there's sort of chunks flying in the air.
I love him. You are so dead, Fleming.
Yeah, he's a vampire, so yeah, he's dead.
Why not go for thirds? And this is another trope for a comedy skit where the instantly arriving babies.
Or getting pregnant overnight.
You know, in comedies, people are never happy to have children. It's always like a negative surprise and a "that's not my kid."
Doesn't have a pulse.
Yeah, that's mine.
This ugly one over here does look like you, Boris.
I've never seen that copper top before in my life. That's not my baby.
Where do you think I got it? Circuit City? It's yours.
Reference to Duracell batteries. Also a reference to electronics store Circuit City, which closed its doors in the early 2000s, I believe.
Guys.
And again, we knew that their good fortune wouldn't last, and besides, you wouldn't want to see them with these gals every week. It'd be like they were married. So, I mean, that's what killed Mork and Mindy. And moonlighting. You can't be in a happy, committed relationship in a sitcom. Thank you very much for watching episode 4 and allowing Mr. Lobo to once again suck the life and magic out of all this great work that these boys are doing. Please stick around and watch episode 5 with Mr. Lobo coming up next.